In boxing news, Derrick James sues his former client, Errol the Truth Spence, for not paying the remaining balance that he is owed on the Terrence Crawford-Errol Spence fight. The lawsuit goes on to say that Errol Spence paid Derrick James $350,000 for training camp and would pay him the remaining $2.5 million once his cash got liquidated and he could get his hands on the funds. The lawsuit says that time came and went, and Errol Spence hasn't paid him. When Derrick James called Errol Spence, the lawsuit says that Errol Spence refused to pay him. He also says that he is not owed 10% of his purse earnings with Crawford. And peep this, he also says that Al Haymon told him that $350,000 was more than generous for his services for the Terrence Bud Crawford Errol Spence fight. Okay, now when it comes to contracts and trainers and stuff like that, from my knowledge and me asking around, they say that 10% split of the purse that the fighter earned is standard. Okay, so they say that is standard. It is nothing new. It is nothing outrageous. It's basic. Okay, now with that being said, if Derrick James does not have this in writing, if there was no ink put to paper, these guys is just wasting their money. Now with Errol Spence, if Errol Spence does have a contract with Derrick James and ink was put to paper, he's going to be wasting his money, because a contract is a contract and you have to honor it. You don't get what you deserve, you get what you honor. Everybody knows that. But what it did was it satisfied the curiosity and what I thought Errol Spence thought about paying Derrick James in the first place. He didn't think that he was worth paying that remaining balance. Hell, I didn't think that Derrick James was worth paying for the effort that he put in the Terrence Crawford fight. So basically, in a nutshell, Derrick James didn't prepare him at all, and he paid him for what he was worth and what he brought. So the only way that this happens is if Errol Spence feels that Derrick James did an insufficient job. Here's the thing, that's not Derrick James' fault. That's Errol Spence's team's fault. It wasn't hard to tell that Derrick James didn't have the chops to prepare him for a Terrence Bud Crawford. It also didn't help that Derrick James went around showboating more than being concerned for the fight. Not watching the fight, not watching films. Just being more concerned with calling Bomac ma'am and a fat guy to eat Cheetos more than training Errol Spence to prepare for a fight like that, which was the biggest fight of his career. Now, Derrick James and his team says that they don't know about the Al Haymon stuff. Errol Spence is not under Al Haymon's management, at least anymore, even though he never was, because Al Haymon is not registered under any manager. This is how he escapes the Ali Act. But they say that it was no Al Haymon present or represented in the agreement that they struck between the two of Errol Spence Management Company and them. So they say, regardless of what Al told him about not paying Derrick James, it doesn't matter because he wasn't present during the negotiations. Like I said, this was an interesting read, but the only thing that I get from it is this. Like I said, if there's a contract, there's a contract, fine. But it leads me to believe that there's no contract. And I'm going to tell you why. Derrick James didn't know how insufficiently he was getting paid until he got Ryan Garcia and Anthony Joshua as clients. Then he was able to see the paperwork, and I think with his standard fee for him to have, then he went on trying to apply that to Errol Spence. Because this is the thing. It has to be due to Derrick James' performance, because if he agreed to pay you up front, which he did, and if he agreed to pay you on the back end, what changed between now and then in the fight? It would have to be the fight. So if he was ready to pay you before and after, before the fight actually happened, then that means there was something about your service that he wasn't happy with. Unless he was planning to rip you off all along. which I don't see why, because you've done business with him this long. And Derrick James didn't start talking about money till he started looking at Anthony Joshua's contracts and how he was paying him and how Ryan Garcia was paying him. So it leads me to believe it was no contract. And being that Errol Spence is talking to Al Haymon, that must be the case. Because Al Haymon, you know, he's no fool. He would have clearly told him, if this is a contract, you're going to have to honor that, because once they take you to court, you can't beat what's on that paper. So evidently, it must not be no contract. So Errol Spence and Derrick James was working off good faith. Now, do you remember what I said in, I can't even remember what video it was, things that I was hearing about Errol Spence? And one of the things that I heard about Errol Spence is that he was extremely cheap. He didn't want to pay nutritionists. He didn't want to pay Blu-ray. He didn't want to pay none of those people. So once again, it shows that my source was accurate. You know what I'm saying? Evidently, Errol Spence must be cheap, on top of thinking that Derrick James doesn't deserve it. You know? So this is why the bags was took out of the gym, and this is why they're no longer working together. And I think it's sad. And if there is no contract, let it go, because what you can get and the money you can make from here on out would make up for it. And let's face it, you really didn't prepare him for that fight. You really didn't. I wouldn't even be happy taking the rest of the money knowing that I didn't prepare him like I was supposed to prepare him. Even if some of it was on his end, we share it together because we are a team. I just think it's sad that they can't get along because of this. And out of all things, it's money. You know, I said before, Derrick James should just chalk that up, because a lot of clientele that he has gotten and he will get is off the back of Errol Spence. Well, not off the back of Errol Spence, but working with Errol Spence. But the fact that Errol Spence was so dominant is what made him highlighted in the first place. Would he be named Trainer of the Year without Errol Spence? No. Now, this is what you could ask yourself. Would Errol Spence still been the dominant fighter that he is without Derrick James? More than likely, yes. You know, I hate to say it, but more than likely, yes. Because Derrick James really doesn't add nothing really significant that you can stand out and say that you could only get from him. He really doesn't. You know? So, I don't know. But if ink is put to paper, pay the man. If ink wasn't put to paper, you just wasting your money. Should Errol Spence pay him the rest of what he owed? Yeah. But now you're talking about integrity, doing the right thing when nobody is looking. That's not a prerequisite to living life, and you don't have to. So if Errol Spence see a loophole in that and not paying Derrick James, could I blame him? No, I can't blame him. Just like I can't blame Derrick James for wanting the rest of his money. You know what I'm saying? I can't say either guy is really wrong or right. At this point, it's their prerogative, if you ask me. But business is business. And you don't get what you earn, you get what you negotiate. And if he negotiated that, you owe the man. Point blank, period. But I don't think Al Haymon would tell Errol Spence that he didn't have to repay him the remaining balance of that money if he didn't know a contract wasn't in the play. So it's interesting to see how this whole thing is going to play out. Like I said, I think Derrick James' job that he did was insufficient. I think he was too cocky about it. I think he did too much praying to Buddha instead of studying and coming up with a solid game plan, knowing Errol Spence's weaknesses and knowing Terrence Crawford's strength, also with his weaknesses. That was his job. And if he didn't do that, of course, I wouldn't want to pay anybody. Would you want to pay for a meal that wasn't correct? That wasn't what you signed up for or nothing like that? Fine. Now, the only thing with Errol Spence is, if he is the truth, you gave the man your word that you would pay him that. And if it wasn't a problem before the fight, but it's a problem after the fight, that means he's not satisfied with his services. And if the truth wants to honor his words, that's honestly up to the truth. But it just goes to show you how that nickname was never something that he should have been wearing in the first place, because he obviously is a person that doesn't tell the truth. That's just my thoughts on this. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm out.